Well, good afternoon. I'm John Christopher White. I'm Perry's nephew. We're all gathered here today to honor Perry, and I'd just like to open up with a word of prayer. And Father God, we thank you that you've created Uncle Perry and you've created each one of us, Lord, and there's nobody here that loved him more than you. And we just thank you for his life. We thank you for all that he was and all that he meant to each and every person, and every little bit of change in our own lives that was a result of his life touching ours. And Lord, we just pray for your grace that you'd help us to really honor him and rejoice at who he is. We thank you and give you this time in Jesus' name. Amen. I want to really honor Uncle Perry. There's a scripture that says, honor your father and mother, that it may be well with you, and that you would live a long life. That's the first commandment with promise. And the boys want to very much honor their father and their grandfather. Perry was an exceptional person, and he affected every life here differently. Some of us knew him as uncle, others knew him as dad, others as Gramps or Pear, or you might have had some other pet names for him. And but everybody knew him. And so what I'd like to do today is just kind of do like a puzzle, get all the straight edges gathered up and put together, and I'll try and frame them and give a little background about what I know about Uncle Perry and who, some of my experiences. And then I've been gathering, running around gathering things that people have shared about him. I've been asking some questions. Some of them are hard questions, like, if he was here today, what's one thing you'd thank him for? And that's the kind of question that makes you think, and really, you have to kind of bring him into focus to know how to think that. So if everybody could share a little bit, later on we could I'm going to pass the mic around or open this up, and I know Hannah's going to share, and John Lake and some others. And if everybody gets together and brings their small piece of the puzzle, we might really be able to get a very clear picture of Perry White, more than these pictures. And I think everybody would go home knowing him better, and I think that would really honor him. So anyway, and also told Hannah, he's watching, and if we don't keep it good and light, I may just dissolve into a puff of smoke. So with one look from his eyes. No. But anyway, this is Perry William White. Was born in, I believe, Lamb County in 1938 to Lena and Walter White. And my grandfather was a sharecropper out down south of Sudan, out near Bull Lake. My dad took me to the house. It was a really dusty, dusty place, windy. And he was the last of a second crop of kids. The older ones, his oldest, Aunt Catherine and Edna, Alvin, and Ray, were pretty much all grown up and married and even had kids by the time Perry was even born. So he had Rita Faye, my father, Joyce, and himself out there. World War II came along, and my dad left in 1942. The other two boys left, and he was really left with just Joyce and himself. Rita Faye got married, and my grandmother and grandfather. When Perry was 9, my grandfather just basically worked himself to death. He dropped in the kitchen, and I remember my grandmother saying she was putting the pills in his mouth. And so, there's a 9-year-old boy there watching this, and he became the man of the house. And they moved to Lubbock, and Grandma ran a boarding house for a while, and one of her sons built her a little house over there on First Place. And so Perry and Joyce and Grandma moved into that house. And they really didn't have much of a legacy, physical things when they were growing up. But my grandmother was very much a woman of faith. But when Perry was 12, his sister Joyce, that was 18 at the time, was murdered, and it was a very difficult time for the family. I mean, it wasn't just wasn't just an ordinary murder. It was the guy came back. It was a very big ordeal. It was in the front page for months and months and months. And it was very difficult for Perry because, Joyce took care of him while Grandma was doing the work, and he lost his best friend. And then he was just left with that, and that was a difficult time for a 12-year-old to grow up in. And he was stigmatized in this town by the front page news and the ultimate capital punishment and the trials and everything. So it was really a difficult time. But Perry developed, that shaped him, and what it shaped him into has shaped each person here in some respect, As I was talking to people, when he was left with a legacy, is he had this when he left home. He had his good looks, his wits, and a praying mother. And I really believe, I know Grandma told me that she said, I prayed for him every day of his life. I prayed for you every day of your life. And I needed a lot of prayer. I was 26. Uncle Perry did influence my life because I heard all the stories. He had adventure. And he moved to Mexico. He would go to Mexico. And so when I was 19, 20 or something, I moved to Mexico, and pick the wildest spot on the map and go there. And so he did have an influence because I really admired. I was always proud of. Oh yeah, I saw Uncle Perry. He's so cool. He's so much fun. And so I've got those memories. And just family things, different things. This is a small thing, just to prompt you to kind of think and maybe see how you might share this. He brought us some fresh fish from Guaymas. Now, I was raised Catholic, and so every Friday the school would feed us these salmon croquettes with bones. It was hideous. You couldn't eat them. Or fish sticks with bones. And then we'd get home and have tuna fish, some kind of form of tuna fish. Anyway, I thought fish was hideous. But he brought us this stuff, and it was breaded and fried. It tasted, oops, are we still there? It tasted like quail. It was delicious. And so I actually thought fish is edible. But that actually wouldn't have happened if it hadn't been for Uncle Perry. And same thing with antelope. I really developed a taste for wild game. So that was a small thing. Perry probably had no idea that had a lifelong influence. But even those small things, I better read my notes. One thing to really, of the things I've talked about, one word that has come up multiple times talking to people is the word adventure. And Perry was adventurous. He really loved to take the bull by the horns. Well, knowing him, probably literally, at some point in life. But he loved adventure. But one thing I do know about him is he loved bringing people into situations of adventure. He loved to take people fishing and watch them experience fishing for the first time. And I was talking to Todd, and he said, as far as horse racing, he loved horse racing, but one of his chief joys was bringing people up to the winner's circle and letting them experience that elite place of honor and really get to experience that themselves. So he would bring people fishing, and he was extremely gifted with people. But those are things that were important to him, and he was able to share it. It was a passion. And so he's a very passionate man. He was very loyal. That's another word that came up, is just he was tremendously loyal to his family and friends. He valued loyalty. He valued integrity and honor. His handshake was his word. His contracts were all based on simply his handshake. And if somebody wasn't true to their word, they didn't have much place in his life. He valued that, and he valued it by living it. Another thing is he was very real, and he was fun to be around. And so I know that's a true thing. He was also able to keep a confidence. You give him a secret, it stayed a secret. What happened in Guaymas stayed in Guaymas, But I asked John Perry, what was one thing, one of the things, and he told him he said, protect your name. It's the only one you have. And that's some good advice, and it helped John Perry to steer his life. And so that's a very, those are things that he honored, that define Perry. I can see that from what I know him. He's very much a man of his word, and he also, John Perry was saying, he wasn't a wordsmith, but he expressed very clearly. He communicated with his eyes and with his body language. And that's when the last time I saw Uncle Perry, my son and I had come out. I wanted my son to get to know his Uncle Perry, his great Uncle Perry. And so we came out to good night, and he met me at the door, and he lit up like a Christmas tree. And he communicated so much love, value, and acceptance through just that expression. And so I know y'all all have experienced his eyes and what he thought of you. And sometimes, like John Perry said, sometimes you didn't want to hear what he thought. He could express the good and the bad, but he was very genuine. He didn't mince his words, and he was very real. He didn't lie with his eyes by any respect. He told you the truth, and he really spoke clearly, and I know that to be true. And one thing he had his routines. And so he would very often frequented the Texas Roadkill restaurant, as he called it, Dyer's Barbecue, and Outback, and he had his own table. In fact, Jimmy Williams was saying that Perry had his own coaster with his name that they designed for him. And I asked if he could have it, because, that was Perry. I was talking to his other family over here that he had for 10 years. What's your last? Marco and his sisters. And, they were they always had the same restaurant, same family, same everything. What they shared with him, because Marco was with Perry when he passed away, and his sisters, they were a part of his family for 10 years. And they said, he was a father to them. And every one of them said, they didn't know the other one had said it so much, but said, we didn't go there just because it was a job. We went there to be with Perry because we loved him, and he loved us. And he was able to communicate that value and love. And, how many people get to have somebody father them, and an extra family. I know he always loved the people of Mexico. I'll tell one story. As I went down with a friend, we hiked through the Copper Canyon for 2 weeks and finally made it out to Guaymas on the train. And my friend's mother lived in Guaymas, so we stopped, stayed there a few days, and we were eating supper there with his next door neighbor, and just pretty sedate meal. And I asked what their neighbor did, and he said, well, I'm a boat captain. I said, I have an uncle that comes down here and goes fishing all the time. He goes, what's his name? I was like, Perry White. He jumped up. Perry White? Oh, Perry White! That's mucho hombre. Oh, Perry. When he went around the table, he picked me up, grabbed me, and he's like, Perry White! Oh, si te presi. And he was so excited. He took us out on the boat. If I'd have said, oh yeah, my uncle, the King of England, he probably wouldn't have gotten near as excited. But he loved Perry. And he loved me instantly because I was Perry's nephew. And so I thought, I really think Perry loves this man and the whole family. Even my friends' neighbors like, oh, you're Perry's uncle. It's like, oh, we didn't know we had, celebrity in the house. You're Perry's nephew. So, that's a tremendous influence. And so Perry had that with people. He had that rapport because I really think he genuinely valued people. And so some of y'all we call him friend. You've known him in business associates. That was one thing. He was in the fertilizer business for, 50-something years? Worked his way up without a college education through Patsy's prompting, diligent prompting. He went ahead and tried to, get into that. He got into that, met Jesse Owens, applied for that job, And Jesse must have been a tremendous judge of character, because I will go ahead and share this, that Perry lied on his application about his education. And Jesse talked to him. He said, "You have the job." And he says, "In spite of the fact that you lied on your application." Because he saw somebody that was of value. And so anybody that they sent down, because he's in public relations, to secure a customer, Perry did it. They just said, "Okay, Perry, make them go." And he entertained them down there in Guaymas, or hunting, or any number of ways. And he had a very successful clientele base that stayed with him because they knew he would stay with them and he would give them their best. And he's somebody they could trust. And I think he did not sit there and say, "Hey, you can trust me." He just looked him in the eye and said, "You can trust me. My word is my bond." And he could communicate that very clearly. And so he communicated that love. And so I would like to just share one other thing. Perry did, my grandmother said, "I prayed for Perry every day of his life." And then she said, "I prayed for you every day of your life." And that goes for every grandchild here. And, I know that I should have died multiple times, all the stupid things I did, or any number of times. But yet, I think God answered, I know God answered my grandmother's prayers and kept me alive and brought me to know the Lord. And she passed that legacy of faith on to me. She passed it on to Perry. And I think all that integrity and honesty, and it's a very Christ-like. It's a manifestation of Jesus in his life. So I trust Perry I don't understand quantum physics or dimensions or heaven and hell so clearly as to know whether or not he can hear this or not, but I know he is in the arms of the Lord, and that same Jesus that loved him loves us all so much, and we can come to know him through that same faith that Perry passed on. It was passed on through his mother and on to his family. But I know Hannah would like to speak, and so I'm going to invite Hannah, and then there's John Lake and a few others. I know Woodrow gave me something. I'm still trying to get him to come up, but he promised me that he'd probably puke if he did. So if y'all would like to watch that, I can get him up here. But I asked him, Woodrow's his youngest grandson, and he said, "Well, what would you thank Uncle Perry for, your gramps for?" He said, I think because he taught me how to shoot a gun, how to shoot it right. And I said, "Well, what would you say about him?" He said, "His life was full of adventure." So his life was full. He said, "I don't think the richest man in the world could have filled his life with that much adventure." And I thought, or could have accomplished as much as he did. I thought, what? That's a really great perspective. And I just also with he said, "Es como un padre, es como familia." That was Mario. And he was very kind, and he really did treat us as family. And he did have one thing Todd shared was Perry did like the practical joke. He sent Todd a picture of a colt, high-dollar colt, that was going to be a racehorse. And he and Sydney took a picture of a mule colt and sent him that picture because he hadn't seen it yet. And he's like, "This is not a racehorse." So he was a little bit scared. So in retaliation, Perry had won a very sizable Pick Six ticket, which I understand is a very, very sizable amount of money. And Todd wanted his in cash, and so it was a satchel full of $100 bills, and they had to go someplace, so they left it under the table for Perry to guard. And while Perry wasn't looking, Todd took it. And a little bit later, he came back and saw Perry and what friend was it?
Jimmy Nation.
On their knees, in their 70s, on their knees, underneath that table, looking,
Turned over.
table turned over, looking for that. Actually, it was a woman's purse that he didn't have a satchel for it, so the lady that doled out the cash, he bought her purse for a sizable amount. Anyway, so I probably won't repeat what he called you, but he wanted AH, yes, his middle initials apparently. Anyway, and so he did get him back. But, you know, there's a law of sowing and reaping in the Bible. So Perry had sowed, so he had divine help to help him reap. So Hannah, if you would like to come up and.
So for those of you who I haven't met, I'm Hannah White Bertram, Perry's oldest grandchild. More than a grandfather, he was one of the better friends I've had over the course of my life. He taught me how to play blackjack, drive a stick, a strong sense of right from wrong, and most importantly, an appreciation for a good glass of red wine. He did not suffer fools or tolerate any notion of self-pity. He was a proud, self-made, no-nonsense, keep-to-yourself type of man. He did not speak to fill silence, which I loved about him because you knew that when he did speak, he had something to say. I miss his smile. He would flash you the most genuine and sometimes devious smile from across the room or dinner table. I believe he's in a better place. Religion means something different to each person. For me, it's seeing him live on through those of us left behind. You see his kind eyes in his sons. You feel his rugged yet gentle demeanor when you stand in the pasture on his ranch. And it'll be hard to think of anyone else next time you're in a boat in Cabo feeling free. We put $1 on New England for you, Gramps. It paid well. Thought you should know. We love you so much, and we'll keep the stay fun and full of good food and good wine, just how you work one.
I'm John Alexander, alias John White. We had 5 Johns in the family, so we had to revert to middle names. Perry was my brother-in-law and my good buddy. Our relationship started in 1967, 52 years ago. Patsy was married to Perry. I was a student at Texas Tech at the time, and I happened to be dating the very lovely and talented Lana Painter. So we had that relationship, and that summer of '67, Perry and Patsy had the great idea that it might be fun to go camping in Colorado. So they said, we might want to check out this young guy and let's invite him along. So I got invited, and it was an excuse to be with Lana, so I said, hey, why not? So we came up to Lubbock and began to pack up. And Perry had a new, I think it was a 1966 plum-colored Chevy Caprice, 2 doors. And then I found out who was going on the trip. It was Perry and Patsy and me and Lana and Mama Painter and baby Steve White, 3 years old. So there's 6 of us in this Chevy Caprice, along with sleeping bags, tents, food, clothes. So we were sitting on all this stuff and had to bend over from the ceiling of the car. And we headed off to Wolf Creek Pass in Colorado. And we eventually got there, and Perry did find a campsite. We pulled out the tent, and the gals got the tent, and along with Steve, and Perry and I got the ground. We had sleeping bags, we were by the campfire, and partway through the night, Perry thought it would be a fun idea. Why don't I make coyote calls? So he proceeded to make these growling and howling noises, and he thought that was great sport. But we woke up the next morning, and all the people that had camped next to us were gone. I don't remember much else of what happened during the camping trip. We were only there a couple of days, but we wanted to get our money's worth, so we really didn't leave until toward the evening of one day. We started heading back toward Lubbock. And somewhere in a small town in New Mexico, Perry was in a hurry to get home, and one of the local gendarmes got him for speeding. So he pulled us all over, and here's this whole car full of people, and he said, well, you're gonna have to, I need to arrest you, we're gonna have to bring you all into night court. So this apparently was a revenue method for this small town. And they had court going on all night. So we pull up, and it looked like one of these clown cars with the clowns coming out of the car, all this unloading out of this thing. And we go into the court, and right away we figure out that this is a cash-only deal. No credit cards, no checks. And we were not prosperous at the time. Between us, we had about 20 bucks. The fine was far more than that. So we told them we didn't have the money to pay the fine. Perry kept trying to negotiate with the judge. You can imagine how well that went. This went on for hours. In the meantime, we're sitting in the court, all of us in the back. Steve's crying. We want to get out of there. And this went on for hours, and we keep denying the fact that we have money. The judge didn't believe us because we're driving this fancy plum Caprice. Eventually, they had to relent and understand that we didn't have the money. So they took everything we had, not left with a penny. We finally were able to leave. We were leaving, and we were headed back toward Lubbock, and about that time, Mama Painter says, boy, I'm sure glad they didn't find out about the money in my bra. She had about $100 tucked in. Perry went livid. We had spent the night in the police station, and the money was there all along. But she wouldn't cough it up. So he was sniffed all the way back to Lubbock. We did make the cone, and that was my first real exposure to Perry White. But we hit it off right away. And despite the warning signs, I married the lady, and we became part of the family. And for me, being an only child, being sibling challenged, it was a double blessing for me. I got a wonderful wife, but I also got a big brother that I've never had. So the next 10 years, we really drew close. We made a commitment with our families that every year at least we would gather in Lubbock. We came at Christmas time for about a week, and we would come in the summer, and our family, Perry's family, would all get together and enjoy some memorable occasions. It did create a lot of memories. I remember that the painter's home was really our experimental base for home repairs. We didn't know what we were doing, but when something broke, we would try and fix it. And it became a game. It was really fun. And eventually, even though we didn't know what we were doing, we'd get it fixed. I remember playing bridge late into the night. For Perry and I, it was more of a sport. We didn't have rules. The girls had rules. They followed the rules. And it was pretty frustrating to them that Perry and I would usually win because we didn't play by the rules. I remember Christmas Eves in the living room with the painters, assembling toys, G.I. Joes, and whatever else we had to assemble. And if we would find a good toy, like a helicopter, well, we would play with it. And one evening, we completely ran the batteries out and had to get new batteries for it. So we did have fun with that. I remember sitting in the living room watching the Dallas Cowboys and eating leftover turkey sandwiches. I remember leg wrestling in the floor in the living room. And Perry and I were competitive a little bit, and so we would start off leg wrestling 2 out of 3 times. Well, depending on who won, then we'd go, okay, how about 3 out of 5? And we may get to 26 out of 50 too. We leg wrestled up during the night. I remember the fishing trips to Mexico. It was previously mentioned, Guaymas. And one trip, we took the gals along, we took Lana, and she was particularly helpful because she was pregnant, and she spent her time chumming over the side of the house. I remember pheasant hunting, and Perry telling me to stand down at the end of the corn row and then driving 2 trucks toward me with this big cable in between, and all of a sudden, all these pheasants flying into my gun. He had a way about him. I remember treating each other's kids like they were our own. They were family. We had good memories. But you know, as often happens in life, things change. And when Patsy and Perry divorced, we just gradually grew further apart. We tried to keep in touch with the kids, but things weren't the same. And then ultimately, over a period of time, our son moved to Dallas. We began to develop a travel route that happened to go through Claude. And occasionally we get to chat with Perry and Cindy, and more recently got a chance to visit and restore that relationship. So I was very pleased we were able to do that. Perry was my friend. He was fun. He was caring. He was generous. He loved his family. He had a zest for life. So Perry, my brother from another mother, I love you and I miss you.
Well, I know there's several words that have been repeated, and that's one thing. Perry knew how to be a friend. He really did. And so I know, like what Sydney said, you could thank him for one thing right now. She said, I'd thank him for being my best friend. And, you know, there's a lot of people don't get many best friends, but I have a feeling that Perry had a lot of best friends, people that considered him their best friend because he was such a good one. Are there others that would like to share a story, just some little piece of the puzzle that might give some insight? I got a lot of insight from John's stories that, you know, I can appreciate Perry a little more, actually a lot more. He summed him up very well.
I met Perry and started dating my sister. And Perry immediately treated me like a sister. I remember one particular time, he was always there for me. Life was kind of hard back then, and we were all pretty broke. One Christmas, I was about 12 years old, and I just found out. I was my father. Things were too lean. It was the 18th of December, and I was, where's our Christmas tree? And Dad said, there's no Christmas tree this year. And I remember running into the living room, Patsy and Perry were sitting, and I was crying. And they wanted to know what was going on, and I said, there's not going to be a Christmas tree this year. And Perry sat there for a minute, and he jumped up and he said, let's go. And I knew with Perry, it was going to be an adventure. It was always an adventure. I didn't know whether we were playing password, whether we were playing a game of Monopoly where I threw all the tokens at him, where I got so mad at him. But it was going to be an adventure. We jumped in the car, and we drove to 34th. And we got to a lot, and we all looked, and Patsy was pretty particular about a tree. So we searched, finally found one, but instead of taking it to the front, to the cashier, We took it to the back of the lot, and we stuck it in a hole, and then we were leaving, and I'm like, what about the tree? And Perry said, later. Later. So we got it, drove a block and a half away, and we parked. And the lights went off at the tree place. The guy went into his trailer, the lights went off in the trailer. And then we went around to the alley. And we slowly, without lights, went down the alley, the muddy alley. We got almost to the tree lot, and Perry jumped, we all jumped out of the car. Perry jumped out, running across the vacant lot, grabbed that tree. But we had the door open, he stuffed it in the back seat, and we jumped all back in the car, and the three of us in the front seat, and he gunned it. And nothing happened. We were stuck in the mud. We were stuck. And so we started rocking it and doing everything. And all of a sudden, he jumped out of the car, opened the back seat, grabbed that tree, ran it back to the lot, stuck it in the hole, and we ran back. And and we all got out. We were pushing. He instructed me. I was getting branches. I was getting cardboard. I was getting anything to put under those tires. And Patsy was rocking. She put it forward and reverse. And we were rocking it and gunning it. And Perry and I were pushing it in the mud. We were covered in mud. We were pushing the car and rocking it and putting things down. After about 10 minutes, we finally got it out. And Patsy said, "Let's go." I'm jumping in the car. Perry said, "My gosh, I'm getting that tree." He jumped out of the car, got the tree, shoved it in the back seat, jumped in the car again, and would take off. Well, it was very evident. We got back on 34th, and the car was in trouble. It was smoking, it was doing all kinds of things. We went 10 miles an hour down Flint. That's the best he could do. He was doing something, I don't know if it's the transmission or the engine, but we finally made it home. He got that tree out and he stuck it there in the living room. He said, "Lana, that's the most expensive tree you will ever have." I felt really bad, but you know what? I was smiling because that tree gave us a little bit of the spirit of Christmas that year that was not going to be. But Perry cared. Perry cared for me. Perry cared for his family. He was a caring man. And he didn't want me to be that disappointed that year. And that was a bit of Christmas spirit that lifted us that year. And I remember that very well. I love him. He was like a brother to me. And I'll miss him tremendously.
You want me to share about Churchill? Break the news?
Yeah, you get into that.
Well, the boys all know that of any place that Perry really enjoyed, it was the Sea of Cortez, Cabo San Lucas, and so sometime in August they're going to spread his ashes out there on the Sea of Cortez, most of them, because Todd's going to abscond with a few and place them on the racetrack at Churchill Downs. Because that's
Just a little bit.
just a little bit, but you know, because Churchill Downs was a part of Perry, and so now Perry will be a part of Churchill Downs. So it was just because, you know, that was important to him. You know, and y'all are important to him. And so, you know, he's left a part of, like Hannah said, part of himself in everyone he's touched, and he's going to live on through that. And everybody can be very thankful for Perry. So, appreciate it.
Yeah.